Ja, wunderbar. Dankeschön.
Wonderful. Thank you. This is becoming a good day. Yesterday, on Saturday, in the center of our discussion was the question how to overcome the unjust policies of geopolitics into a just policy of cooperation. And in the evening, in the concert, we were shown how classical music can show us the love and the motivation to work together. And now, on the second part of the conference, we will look at the scientific challenges which such a just world order demands. And now, as a first speaker, I want to present Jason Ross, the scientific advisor to the Schiller Institute in the United States. And he asked to show a short clip of Mr. LaRouche before his speech. So now I'm asking the technicians to show us this video, and then Jason will start it.
The characteristic of life itself, and also of human life in particular, is that which is lied about by the greenies, by the so-called environmentalists. All environmentalists are by nature liars and perverts. Why? Because contrary to the great lie, nature is not fixed, nor is there a second law of thermodynamics, except in the minds of idiots. The record shows, for particularly over 500 million years of our study of life within this galaxy, under the influence of this galaxy. And what has happened? There's constantly an increase. There is not a decrease. There's not a depletion. There is no such thing as zero growth. There's positive growth. The universe, as we know it, and especially life, is characterized by positive growth. Why have some animals become extinct? Because the standard for existence of animal life is increased. That the species which have not improved their energy flux density become extinct, like the dinosaurs. And the second law of thermodynamics is one big lie based on the oligarchical system. There's no truth to this idea of that kind of system. It's not true. Therefore, mankind's existence is based on the fact that mankind is the only species of which we know which has the willful power to increase the energy flux density of life as a whole on our planet Earth and beyond. And that's the meaning of this process. The universe is moving upward and leaving the greenies behind. We have to understand that this process, that life, well, the work of Vanatsky and others points in this direction. There are many indications that point in this direction. But the nature of the thing is that an increase in energy flux density throughout the planet, among the species that inhabit the planet, is the precondition for the survival of any species. Any species that does not rise to a higher level, to progress, to greater energy flux density. There's an explanation for this which is rather important to consider. What's the problem? Why do people say that we're using up energy? Why do they say we have these kinds of problems? Well, because the planet is polluted by a certain kind of human being who believes that there are too many human beings on this planet, or that mankind is consuming and producing too much power on this planet. They want to stay back to a more modest population, like the British now have ordered. The British royal family has demanded that the population, the human population of the planet, be reduced from the order of magnitude of, 5 billion years, 5 billion population, down to 1 or less. This is the official policy of the British Empire. It's a policy of mass murder. It also is a policy which, if it carried out, means that the human species will become extinct by the virtue of this policy. And the fact of the matter is that mankind's ability to exist as a species, on the one hand, is the fact that mankind is able to increase the energy flux density which we're able to apply to the existence of human beings on this planet. And those who have a contrary view are called the oligarchical system. The oligarchical system is a bunch of fruitcakes, to use the term politely, who believe that mankind is divided into 2 groups of people. A small but honorable group of people who believe that there are too many of the lower folk. And we have to reduce and keep down the number of lower class folk in order that the degenerates who call themselves oligarchs will be able to enjoy themselves more freely. It's what Bertrand Russell said. If we could kill enough people in each generation, people could procreate quite freely because they were going to die conveniently after having the little pleasures. And so the issue here is that the destiny of humanity, as the destiny of any species, depends upon, as has been demonstrated by 500 million years of living processes and investigation, depends upon increasing the energy flux density per capita. It means increasing the size of the human population. Without those measures, there is no future. And the oligarchs will have to become extinct if they continue their policies. Well, if they wish to become extinct, that's their business. But they should not meddle in our bedroom.
All right. Great. So I'm so happy to be here. And I'm going to be discussing today the scientific challenges confronting us in the new paradigm and the type of scientific inquiry that has historically shown itself to be the best in resolving them. Along the way, we'll talk about the connections between science and economy, the problems of information theory, and an opportunity for you to get to know better science from the inside. I begin with this chart of a type of life on Earth. It's unlabeled. Does anybody know what this is a chart of? Any hypotheses? This is some kind of life on Earth. What is it? Human population growth? Any other ideas? Crypto? Okay. Well, this is a chart over the past 150 million years of the diversity of mammalian life. So displacing the older age of the reptiles, the dinosaurs, the mammals are a higher level of technology. And we've seen this growth over 150 million years. Now, here is the image I think people may have been expecting to see. This is human population over 5,000 years. So 1/30,000th of that last chart is what we see here. In effectively the blink of an eye in evolutionary time, we have fundamentally transformed the relationship of our species and really all life to nature and to each other. We've done this repeatedly. So what's the difference between these two kinds of growth? Well, it takes millions of years to introduce what we might call a new biological technology, an evolutionary technology, the cellular nucleus of eukaryotes, the move to land, photosynthesis, being warm-blooded, flight. These all took a very long time. Human development occurs in an instant, as if through a discontinuous leap, an unbridgeable change from a fundamentally lower form to a higher one, in a way that's not quantitative and it is not reachable or expressible in the lower form. These leaps, these discoveries, they occur in individual human minds. They're introduced socially, but they're discovered in individual human minds. And this is a fundamental distinction between us and the animals. There are human individuals, but outside of their relationship to human culture, there are no historically important animals. Do the history books name the first otter to crack shells on its chest? Did they write history books? Okay. So this is a fundamental change. We, by hypothesizing and implementing a new kind of cause, we write new chapters in our history. 4 examples of this to give a sense of these stages. The first is fire. According to the Greek story as told by Aeschylus, the human species first became distinct from the animals when Prometheus stole fire from Zeus in heaven and gave it to us, along with many other intellectual gifts. This changed everything. Safety from beasts, cooking, expanding what we can eat and eat safely, working material through heating stones to chip them better, boiling water, textiles. Prometheus also lists other gifts: astronomy, the use of beasts of burden, the calendar, poetry, sailing ships, and number, to name a few. But fire is what serves the best to exemplify the fundamental distinction of mankind from all beasts, and we have the potential to make an endless series of such improvements. What else can you do with fire? When you use heat to transform water into steam, you've figured out a way to turn fire into motion. Just a small amount of the labor that used to be required for productive processes could be applied towards mining and building steam machinery, and then you would liberate an enormous reservoir of power to save from human effort or animal effort production and make things that were available only to a few available more broadly. Fire. 2, chemistry. While animals are limited to physical tools, sticks, rocks, those kinds of things, we have the power to wield ideas to transform our relationship to nature. Chemical technologies, for example. And the first major instance of this is metallurgy. Now, this is a beautiful green rock. It has had many uses over historical time. The Egyptians used it, for example, for makeup. Does anybody know what you can make from this rock? What made it so industrially or culturally important later? Yeah. You can turn that green rock into an orange metal. This is a natural formation of copper. It was possible to find some early in our history. But we could turn the rock into the metal by using the higher power of charcoal. This is the production of charcoal in the traditional way. You burn wood basically covered so it doesn't have access to oxygen, and you get basically a pure carbon fuel. It burns hotter than wood, it's cleaner than wood, and it has the energy and the chemistry, namely plenty of carbon monoxide when you combust it, to pull oxygen out of the rock and liberate for our use the metal they contain. Another example of chemistry is Mendeleev's development of the periodic system of the elements. He introduced a whole new chemical language. So the physical terms of things like density or color, hardness, flexibility, these cannot describe the chemical world. For example, if we compare graphite, charcoal, diamond ring, they're very, very different in their physical characteristics. But these are all compounds of just the element carbon. So diamonds are hard, graphite is not. Is carbon hard? Graphite conducts electricity, charcoal does not. Does carbon conduct electricity? Does carbon have a density? Does carbon have a color? It does none of those things. A chemical element has a susceptibility of participating in various compounds that do have physical characteristics, but there's a new world of even language that we use to discuss chemistry itself. Atomic mass, valence, enthalpy, to understand chemical transformations. The expansion of chemistry in the 19th and 20th centuries brought us internal combustion engines, synthetic dyes, dynamite, plastics, abundant natural fertilizer, powered flight, heat pumps, new types of pharmaceuticals, just to name a few. The third of the 4 stages I want to mention is electricity. All energy is not created equal. Let's compare 2 forms, for example, heat and electricity. Among forms of energy, heat is of a lower quality than the concentrated power that you can apply through an electrical process. And even when you lose half of the heat in transforming it into electricity by boiling water or running a steam turbine, that lesser amount of energy in the more concentrated form does more work than a greater amount of low-quality energy. All the heat in the world, you could have the biggest pile of coal imaginable. It cannot take an X-ray of your broken bone. It can't bond metals with laser precision. A pile of coal cannot serve web pages. Electricity is different. Let's take a look at this as a case study. Here you see the energy use per person in the United States, blue, and in China, red. I think we're probably all observing the same trend here. One of these is changing and one of these is not. Let's take a look at the more specific form of energy of electricity. So here we have electrical use per capita in the United States in blue and China in red. If we combine these graphs, we can look at what percentage of energy is electricity. So here you see in blue in the US the percentage of our energy use that is electricity, and you can see in China the stupendous transformation in not just the amount of energy used per person, but the kind of energy used per person. This gets us towards LaRouche's idea of energy flux density that we heard him mention in the video that we just saw. Human progress means more energy, more people, more capital intensity, and more dense applications of energy of a higher form. The 4th and last stage I'd like to discuss is the nuclear era. Our current nuclear plants are already capable of providing reliable electricity from an extraordinarily small amount of fuel. A small amount of labor required to mine uranium, to process it, creates an enormous amount of energy. When we master nuclear fusion, the process that powers the sun, this could be akin to the introduction of the steam engine in terms of the importance it will have on the human species. Nuclear fusion was very important to Lyndon LaRouche, who formed the Fusion Energy Foundation in the 1980s, which published a magazine, Fusion, that was the leading promoter of this scientific breakthrough in the United States, and it worked internationally. So with more plentiful, with inexpensive energy from nuclear fusion, we'll have a fundamentally different relationship to many things. Our relationship to water, when we can desalinate water cheaply enough to use it for agriculture. Our relationship to materials, when we can process ores without requiring the chemistry of charcoal or coke like we do today. Space travel, the ability to reach Mars in a week, to deflect dangerous asteroids. And it's possible, this is a bit speculative, but we might have enough energy with the development of nuclear fusion to get air conditioning in Europe. So in these examples of these 4 stages, I appreciate that, yeah. In these 4 stages, we see exemplified what the creators of the European Renaissance recognized as the identity of the human individual, of man made in the image of a creative God. In one of the pieces that we heard and sang last night, Haydn set to music, und eine neue Welt entspringt auf Gottes Wort. And a new world springs up at God's command. What new worlds will we cause to spring from our ideas? What's next? What are the frontiers of science today, and how will we make progress in addressing them? Well, the nuclear domain is still not mastered. We can reliably use nuclear fusion to make enormously destructive explosives, but not yet to produce electricity or to power spacecraft. Energy storage technologies, whether they be chemical batteries or some new technology that is developed, they will have a major impact on our energy supply and transportation. But even if we had extremely low-cost energy storage and we covered the Earth in solar panels, we would still need nuclear fusion. All the solar panels, windmills, coal power plants in the world cannot power a spacecraft, cannot power a mission to defend our planet from the asteroid that one day we will learn is going to impact us and destroy an entire continent or maybe life globally. Only nuclear fusion can ensure the survival of the human species and really of all life on our planet. A little more than a century ago, the twin discoveries made by Max Planck and Albert Einstein, the discoveries of the quantum and relativity, they've only begun to transform our understanding of light and matter, of energy, space, and time. In fact, their two discoveries have proven to be fundamentally irreconcilable. What new hypothesis will allow us to reimagine both of their work in a way that lets us reconcile the contradictions of quantum gravity, for example? In galaxies, you think of the spiral arms of a galaxy. The stars are rotating around the center. Well, those that are further from the center of the galaxy go too fast. Based on what we can see of the other stars in the galaxy, we could predict a certain speed for their rotation around it. They move quicker. Is this caused by dark matter? Is it something else? Dark energy has been hypothesized to explain the surprising expansion of the whole universe. Is this the right approach? So in order to address these great problems of the new paradigm, we have to address the quality of thought that is applied to them. The social effects of a diet of short posts and videos on X or TikTok, they make it hard to sustain a thought or to develop and work with complex concepts. And information has itself become a dominant concept, displacing ideas. On the difference between these, let's hear from Lyndon LaRouche in his 1992 on the subject of metaphor. He wrote, "During the 25-odd-year reign of today's New Age cult, an ominous crippling of the US individual's cognitive functions has been a building. This loss of mental capacity is presently affecting a growing majority among the under 50 generations. Much of this damage is attributable directly to the multifaceted influence of a modernist dogma, which usually parades under such various names as systems analysis, linguistics, and information theory. Today, for example, rarely are pupils guided to reproduce within their own minds the Socratic experience of reliving the original discovery of crucial principle of scientific knowledge. Lacking the benefits of such once traditional forms of secondary school learning in the subject matter of rigorous formal and synthetic geometries, for example, today's student would virtually never be able to attain an intelligible comprehension of even the bare fundamentals of physical science. Thus, today's modernist classrooms have been turned away from what is too often reviled as authoritarian teaching of conceptions. More and more, the modernists' democratic classroom and sterile textbook merely provide information. Similarly, a generation has passed since the time it was still fashionable to assess a pupil's progress in terms of that student's ability to apply prior learning to the effect of discovering, promptly, appropriate constructions of relevant solutions to unfamiliar problems. More and more, schools employ the more efficient practice of degrading education to the rehearsing of pupils for passing computer-scorable forms of multiple-choice questionnaires. These and other innumerable applications of the pathological information theory doctrine have brought upon us much of that widespread collapse of the individual victim's attention span, which has occurred lately, accompanied by a correlated loss of the potential for those qualities of rationality which are associated with achievement in science and technology. That loss of scientific rationality is linked functionally to a parallel loss of personal capacity for comprehension and enjoyment of such once respected fine arts as great music, or the classical tragedies of Aeschylus, Cervantes, Shakespeare, and Schiller. Such observations pose the question, what makes an ostensibly innocent technical doctrine, such as information theory, so wickedly pathological in its social effects? The most efficient tack for exposing the answer to that question is a more rigorous Socratic definition of the fine arts term metaphor. We signify metaphor as William Empson's 7 Types of Ambiguity, for one, has identified it, as a phenomenon customarily associated with classical forms of poetry and drama. However, by more rigorous, we should also show metaphor as the crucial feature of thought processes bearing upon the geometrical fundamentals of physical science. That sets the task before us. So, without more forward, to work, writes LaRouche. So, doing that work, starting in 1 week, the LaRouche organization will be hosting a series of classes and discussions on key figures and discoveries in what Lyndon LaRouche identified as a narrow path of profound geniuses through history. The guiding concept of this series will be the nature of change as primary, of how to understand cause itself. We'll be reading and discussing primary sources from the Greek thinker Plato, student of Socrates through his Socratic dialogues, Nicholas of Cusa, Johannes Kepler, the first modern scientist who brought astronomy into the realm of physics, Pierre Fermat, who revolutionized the concept of intention in scientific inquiry, and about whom you can read more in a book available outside, the brilliant polymath Gottfried Leibniz, whose infinitesimal calculus gave us a language for discussing cause directly, Carl Gauss, Bernard Riemann, whose work on the complex domain and the shape of space, and higher transcendentals, they challenged the formality that had become hegemonic in math in their day and made discovery itself the fundamental matter of the universe. Then we'll compare, mostly contrast, what we've learned about how these great discoveries have been made with the way that AI functions. What is going on inside ChatGPT while it is thinking about your question? And how is this similar or different from good old-fashioned organic, natural intelligence? So I do hope that you'll all join for these weekly classes. They're starting next Sunday at 5 p.m. Berlin time, 11 a.m. New York time. The sessions will also be recorded, and discussion periods will take place on Wednesdays at 1 a.m. Berlin time, 7 p.m. New York time. And you can learn more and sign up here at larouche.info/science. So in conclusion, my goal with this series of discussions on Lyndon LaRouche's narrow path of scientific discovery is to bring to life the process of hypothesizing the higher hypothesis, of developing insights into the quality of thought, the method of approach that successfully has developed and will develop new higher hypotheses to resolve the contradictions of the older viewpoint. In this sense, by addressing directly this hypothesis of the higher hypothesis, creativity can be taught. Thank you.
Danke, Jason. Es sind ja wirklich enorme wissenschaftliche Herausforderungen.
These are real big scientific challenges which we need now. Our next speaker is Professor Franco Battaglia from Italy. He's professor for physical chemistry at the University of Modena. His theme is there is no energies change and will not be. He sent us a video, but he will be later on live for discussion and can answer questions.
Good morning. The title of my speech is "No Energy Transition is Occurring or is Going to Occur." And this holds true despite all proclamations. They started 50 years ago or so with the advent of the Greens, who promised the smiling sun, a promise unfulfilled even though they have been in the government in various countries, either directly or through proxies, since all political forces have pursued that dream, and the dream was 100% solar energy. Yet, from the dawn of time until about 200 years ago, humanity's energy needs were met 100% by solar energy. Energy from wood and from animals, and energy from humans, mostly slaves. The populations of great civilizations, Aztec, Egyptians, Greek, Roman, were composed of 90% slaves, and wars were fought to acquire energy resources, namely slaves. The movie Gone with the Wind is set 200 years ago in an America with 30 million inhabitants and 4 million legitimate slaves. Fossil fuels powering heat engines have freed mankind from slavery. We should thank God we were born in the age of oil. Oil, along with coal, natural gas, and later nuclear power, have been reducing the solar contribution from 100% to less than 10% today. And this, despite all new technologies that exploit solar energy, hydroelectric, wind, and photovoltaic. In short, solar energy is the energy of the past. The so-called energy transition seeks to return solar to its past glory. How? By switching transportation from thermal to electric engines, and by generating electricity 100% from wind. However, it is apparent that this switch is simply not happening. 30 years ago, fossil fuels provided 85% of global energy. Today, after 30 years and trillions of dollars spent on wind and solar, fossil fuels still account for 85%. Nothing will change this. Why? For a very simple reason. Because in every country, the peak electricity demand is around 6 or 7 p.m. every day. And this is shown in the all-important curve representing the daily electric load, which is this curve here. As we see, there is a peak of demand at around 7 p.m. here. Now, for what is this curve? This curve is the same for every country in the world and for every day of the year. I naturally chose Italy's curve, and as the day of the year, I picked the most important day in the universe, which is my birthday. Keep, however, in mind, every other day or every other country has a similar curve. In it, you can see a base load, which in the case of the selected example is about 20 gigawatts. On December 15, 2024, Italy was consuming at least 20 gigawatts of electricity. Specifically, at 3 a.m. here, it was consumed exactly 20 gigawatts. but during the day the electricity demand increased, reaching a peak around 7 p.m., which in this example was about 40 gigawatts. By changing the country or the day, the numerical values of the electric demand may change. For example, in Italy at around 7 p.m. the demand can reach even 60 gigawatts. What is important is that everywhere in the world and every day of the year at around 6-7 p.m. there is the daily peak in electricity demand. Each country needs enough power plants to safely meet the peak demand. Which plants can meet this requirement? Definitely not photovoltaic plants, because at 7 p.m. solar power produces zero. And wind can be relied upon either. There is no guarantee that at 7 p.m. wind will blow as desired. Therefore, each country must rely on plants that can certainly supply the peak demand. I'll call them conventional plants, and they are hydroelectric, nuclear, and fossil fuel plants. We have no other choice. Among those conventional plants, the only ones that use solar energy are hydroelectric plants. But not every country can rely only on hydro. Some do. For example, Norway and Paraguay meet 100% of their electric needs with hydro. But these are exceptions. Usually, a mix of hydro, nuclear, and fossil fuels is required. In any case, the important conclusion is wind and photovoltaic must be excluded from the mix needed to meet the peak demand, that no energy transition can take place. Now, I'm going to show you why wind and solar should be excluded in any case. Let's see why. Of course, once we have enough plants to meet peak demand, they can also meet lower demands, so there is no need to install more power plants. However, one might still ask whether wind or solar could help during times when the sun shines or the wind blows. This is a legitimate and fair question. It's like saying, although I already have a car for all my transportation needs, I must still get a bicycle. And reason like this: when conditions are favorable, it is not raining, the trip is short, we don't have to carry our children to the nursery or to go to groceries, we have enough strength, we decide to use the bicycle to save on gasoline. Well, in this metaphor, conventional plants are the car, wind and solar are the bicycle. When the sun shines or the wind blows, we'd like to use them instead of conventional plants. This is the idea. But why do we agree to buy a bike? Because the bike costs about 1% of what a car does. A car costs 20,000 euros, say, and a bike costs 200 euros. Of course, if the cost of the bike was not 200 euros, but 2,000 or 20,000, we wouldn't get a bike at all. So let us compare the economic commitment of conventional plants against alternative plants. And let's take the most expensive conventional plant, the nuclear one. What are the costs? Well, recently Poland committed 20 billion euros with Westinghouse to install 3.6 gigawatt of nuclear plants, providing then 3 gigawatt of effective electric power. So much for nuclear. So 20 billion for 3 gigawatt of electricity. Let's go now to solar. Today, Italy produces 3 gigawatt electric from 25 gigawatt of photovoltaic plants. Why do we need to install 25 gigawatt of photovoltaic to get 3 gigawatt of electricity? Well, because for at least 16 hours a day, from 5 o'clock in the evening until 9 o'clock in the morning, solar plants produce 0. Then we need 25 gigawatt to produce 3 gigawatt. The Italian government tells us the cost. The government subsidizes photovoltaic plants with 2.4 billion per gigawatt installed, which, doing the multiplication, the arithmetics, means 60 billion for 25 gigawatt. So the situation is the following: 20 billion for nuclear power against 60 billion for solar. Now, is solar 3 times more expensive than nuclear? Well, not exactly, because solar plants last 20 years and nuclear plants last at least 60 years, 3 times longer. So solar plants seem to be 9 times more expensive than nuclear. I said seem because we are not done yet. Because installing a nuclear plant means that we don't need to install a equi-powerful conventional plant. But installing solar does not avoid installing a conventional plant, since any solar plant counts 0 for 16 hours a day, in particular at 7 p.m. when the electricity demand reaches its maximum. Now, scaling all this reasoning to a production of 1 gigawatt, so making the arithmetics, it turns out that if a nuclear plant needs 7 billion, if a nuclear plant is a 7 billion car, a solar plant is a 70 billion bicycle. Similarly, a wind plant would be a 15 billion bicycle. My personal conclusion is this: governments, which are entrusted with managing taxpayer money wisely, should legally ban all public subsidies to wind and to solar power. In 2011, in a Brussels Parliament room, I gave a talk, and the title of the talk was "Raising Energy Bills, a Failure of the EU Energy Policy." Back then, in Brussels, my words fell on deaf ears. My hope is that now, in Berlin, thanks to the Schiller's Institute prestige, my words will be taken more seriously.
Dankeschön, Professor Battaglia.
Thank you, Professor Battaglia.
Ja. Die Konferenzleitung hat mir zukommen lassen,
The
dass
conference
unser
organizers have told me that
rechtzeitig
our
geschlossen
panel
werden
must be
muss,
closed
weil das
by time,
nächste, das vierte
because
Panel
the next panel, the fourth panel,
um 13:30 Uhr schon beginnen soll.
already should
Es
and
ist
will
manchmal
begin
so,
at
ich möchte die
1:30.
drei
That's
Redner, die wir
sometimes as
noch
it is.
haben,
So
deshalb
that's
bitten,
what I want to ask the
begrenzen Sie
three
Ihren Vortrag auf 15 Minuten,
further
dann schaffen
speakers
wir das alles.
that we have. Please limit your
Manchmal ist es
presentation
so.
to 15 minutes, then we
Der
can
nächste
actually do
Sprecher,
it. That's how
das
it is
ist
sometimes. The
Professor
next
Dr.
speaker
Karl Otto
is
Weiß aus
Professor
Deutschland.
Dr. Karl Otto Weiß
Er
from
ist
Germany.
Direktor
He
und
is
Professor
director and
am
professor
Ruhestand der
in
Physikalisch-Technischen Bundesanstalt in
in the
Braunschweig. Er hält seinen
Physically
Vortrag unter der
Technical
Überschrift
Federal
Das zyklische
Institution in
Klima
Braunschweig.
und die falschen
His presentation
Konzepte der
is
Darstellung des
the
Klimawandels.
cyclical climate
Herr
and the
Professor Weiß,
wrong concepts
bitteschön.
of climate change.
First, I would like, of course, to thank the organizers of this conference to give me an opportunity to display our own research work and also to comment on what I see in the normal, I would say, in the normal propaganda. I have to mention my co-author is Horst Lüdecke, and I should really say I have only had the role of providing ideas and inputs, and he has done all the work, the numerical work, also the reconstruction of the climate for 2,000 years from various sources. And so he's really the one who has done the hard work, and I have only been sort of contributing ideas. He's more interested in talking about energy, so we have sort of split up the tasks. I talk more about climate, and he talks more about energy. Okay, let's have the next slide. What we have done, we had initially the feeling that it would be necessary to analyze longer time spans than what is usually done in the official statements, and we decided we should have data for about 2,000 years for the climate of the globe. Now, you cannot just look up the climate of the globe for 2,000 years in the literature, so we had to reconstruct it from various local sources. And what you see in this picture here is the various places where local investigations were made, and we have combined them all together in generating a global climate of 2,000 years. So you see the different colors are just meant to show what kind of research was done of finding the temperatures in the various locations. Okay, let's have the next slide. Yes, if you look at the, sorry, I have to, oops. If you look at the upper chart, you see the gray values which are coming out of this averaging of the various locations on the Earth. You see there's a lot of scatter, and you can relatively easily construct from that the climate. The climate is defined as the 30-year average. So we take a running average of 30 years over the gray values, and we get the blue curve. And the blue curve is the climate. And it's quite instructive to see what it shows in details. It shows all the historically known maxima and minima, like the Roman maximum, the medieval maximum, the present maximum, the little ice ages, and in particular even details. If you look at the minimum of 1450, which is not very much researched, but is known already, it shows very clearly also this detail. And of course, it shows also the it shows the rise of the last century, or let's say from 1850, which is always attributed to warming by CO2. So we get all the, from this we get an idea that the reconstruction of the global climate is reasonably reliable. And now we want to analyze it. The idea was to look at cycles. This is something which every physicist, every engineer does at the very first, if he's confronted with some irregular looking quantities. There's a good reason for that because, I wouldn't go into details, but for good reasons, the occurrence of cycles in the world and in physics is a very common phenomenon. Okay, so we have taken the gray values and we have applied what is called Fourier transform, which is a means of finding out if there are cycles or if there are no cycles. And what you see in the next picture, this is what is called a spectrum. And you see basically the whole spectrum consists of 3 prominent cycles, and the rest is just sort of noise. So these 3 prominent cycles, if we look at the periods, we see that these correspond exactly to what was known already before from local measurements. So it means that's another confirmation that our representation of the global climate is probably reliable. Okay, so we see the 3 cycles, and let's go forward. If we look closer, we can correlate these 3 cycles with the solar activity. This is a spectrum of 8,000 years of solar activity, and we see the 3 main cycles. Oops. Sorry, the 3 main cycles correspond exactly to the periods of the global climate. So the connection between solar activity and global climate is very well known by the works of Svensmark. So we can correlate the climate cycles of the Earth to the solar activity cycles. Okay, there's a further interesting detail that the solar activity cycles can be traced back to the motion of the planets, but that's a relatively new result, but very interesting in physics, not so much in politics. And so we see the global climate is determined by the, sorry, I have to go back. Oops. No. Okay, I have to go back to this. Now, okay, to visualize things, in the lower chart, we have plotted the 3 cycles, which we have seen before in the frequency in the spectrum. And you see there these 3 cycles, they are superimposed on the gray values, which are the measurements. And now if we just add these cycles, because they, in nature they occur at the same time, we go back to the upper curve, and we see the red curve is the sum of the 3 cycles in the lower curve. And if you look, you see that the red curve and the blue curve, which is the climate, corresponds exactly. In particular, the red curve, which is the sum of the 3 cycles, corresponds exactly to the increase of temperature over the last 150 years, which supposedly is caused by CO2. In reality, it is nothing more than just a result of these 3 cycles occurring at the same time. Okay, and after you know that, you understand CO2 is at most a negligible influence on the climate, probably none at all. And so I would say, okay, time. I would say, if you know that, any further discussion of CO2 and climate is meaningless and also useless. Okay, so I've given you this idea of how the climate is determined, what determines the climate on the Earth, and that's the sort of scientific part. The interesting part I wanted to point out also is how false the official statements about
Hobbes's Leviathan, the world in which man is a wolf for man. That entire system, including the concept of man that underlies it, must now be put through bankruptcy reorganization along the lines specified by Lyndon LaRouche. Thank you very much.
Vielen Dank, Dennis Small.
Thank you very much, Dennis Small.
Ich finde es auch besonders, deshalb möchte ich das noch mal kurz sagen.
I'd like to stress this the central contribution of Mr. LaRouche to the physical economy and to science, that this was mentioned again by Dennis Small and brought a little bit closer to us. I would summarize this in my words, the idea is to create the connection between the inventions of single persons and the positive effects of these things on the productive process, and that the change in society, that this is nothing negative, this is something positive, which is a precondition that the humanity has a future. So this is the important thing, that we can project these the future based on these conceptions.
We have
now a 5-minute video from Kenya, a farmer who talks about why physical
and good morning from Kericho, Kenya. My name is Jasper Machogu. Force of Fuels for Africa is my organization, and my message for Sheila Institute today is gonna be, of course, as much as we are preaching for world peace and be worried that maybe a World War III is going to happen, I know that what my people in Africa need is fossil fuels for them, because we have an abundance of resources, especially oil, gas, and coal, that we can use to power our economies, that we can use to better agriculture, that we can use to produce the 4 pillars of modern civilization. And that way, we can bring peace amongst ourselves. So number one, fossil fuel for Africa, reason number one is going to be agriculture. So my main aim, my target is, because over 70% of the African population, about 60 to 70% actually of the African population depends on agriculture for livelihood. And one of the best ways for us to improve their lives is by fertilizer. Synthetic fertilizer has really improved production in the developed countries. And if you look at our fertilizer application, it's very low, 20 kilos per hectare, compared to a place like the US, 120 kilos. And if you go to Europe, 150 kilos. If you go to India, 250. If you go to China, 360 kilos. Compared to an African, 20 kilos per hectare. That is very, very low. And that is why, if you look at our production, a good example is corn, 2 tons per hectare compared to 12 tons per hectare, 11 tons per hectare in the US. So fertilizer. Number 2 is irrigation. Number 3 is farm machinery. And farm machinery is like a beautiful way to, the way I say it is, farm machines amplify and expand our capabilities, and farm machines are going to ensure that we just stop toil in Africa. And number 4 is value addition. Value addition is basically industrialization. We have abundance of farm products that we should be adding value, instead of just exporting raw products to these Western and Asian countries. Why don't we build industries in Kenya, let's say here? Why don't we build a factory here and just process our tea and process our maize and process our sisal and all of coffee, cocoa, all of the products that we produce here. And that way we're going to ensure that our people have employment, more value, etc, etc. So that is number one, agriculture. Number two is going to be the 4 pillars of modern civilization. Number one is cement. We have plastics. We have steel. And then we have fertilizer. Of course, I talked about fertilizer. Let me talk about those three briefly. So number one, plastics. Modern life today starts in a maternity covered with plastics and ends in ICU covered with plastics. And as much as people say that plastics hurt the environment, plastics are mostly neutral, and their benefits outweigh their negatives far, like you can't compare them. So cement and steel, we can't have modern structures, modern roads, modern hospitals, and all of these beautiful structures, dams, etc., without those two. And those two, we can't have the 4 pillars of modern civilization without fossil fuels. And so my last point is going to be, energy. Energy, of course, we need reliable, versatile, affordable energy. And we have, like we're going to drill our oil, we're going to mine our coal, we're going to tap into our natural gases. So it's going to be affordable, that is for sure. Let me just say that fossil fuels for Africa is going to change Africa and transform it in bigger ways than most people can imagine. And let me just end this long thought by saying that Sheila Institute is doing a wonderful job advocating for world peace, and kudos, and that's what we should all be saying. World peace, but fossil fuels for Africa is going to be a game changer. Enjoy. Enjoy. Enjoy.
So, sehr gutes Video. Sehr gut.
A very good video. Thank you. This morning, I have announced some very positive thing, but I have a bad news. This panel, the time for this panel is over, and in these, we have now 70 minutes to the next panel. I'm terribly sorry that I was looking forward to a discussion about these issues. Perhaps some of the
Ja, danke schön. Plötzlich haben wir 15 Minuten
suddenly we got more 15 minutes more for a discussion. So we take it. So I would ask the speakers to come just on the podium and have we have 15 minutes. So here the speakers are coming. Thanks to the directors of this conference who have showing a kind heart.
Damit wir
so
einiges schaffen auch,
that we can get some things done. Perhaps my first question is, if you're someone from your panel, you want to comment on what some of the others have said, please keep it short. The microphones are all switched on. You can just start talking.
Well, if I'm on, yeah. So I just to respond to the other panelists here, I suppose also with some questions on the use of fossils or on the attack against the use of fossil fuels. I think the case was extremely clear. I'm not certain how the net zero hypothesis squares with the fact that CO2 in the atmosphere is increasing. I'm not worried about that, but I just wanted to ask about it. I'd also wonder if there is more that could be said about the physical hypotheses of what's new in our understanding of nuclear processes that low energy nuclear reactions would reveal that other physics would not. So those are a couple of questions.
Well, it's a very good question, and there's quite a lot of research ongoing in the States. It's an APA-EEC program. In Europe, it was a CMA program, and many points are clarified. We are most advanced with a theory for condensed plasmoids. This was developed by Lutz Geithner. He has a website, he is in Germany, and he explains precisely how this works. But there are some open questions because there's always further questions ongoing. And it's well known that a very high density of electrons helps that so small nuclei can fuse together. It acts somewhere when they come very close. There's a tunneling effect, but more important is that each nuclei has a certain wavelength in the range of 250 meters. And if the wavelength overlaps, those nuclei can also fuse. Yeah? And this was the case, was the calculation from Sakharov a long time ago. And the classical physics, the basic rules, still apply. There's no new physics. And in one case, it's news that even a classical model can achieve the same understanding for the very well very well done research on the nuclei of a hydrogen atom. So it's a challenge for further research. And in Germany, I spoke to the former Minister for Education of Bavaria, and he told me the education for nuclear science was heavily reduced in Germany. And this is not good if you look at those things. Thank you.
One moment for the technique. Professor Battaglia is online. You can put him on the screen. Oh yeah, okay, thank you.
I hope the microphone is on. Is it? Yes, it is. Okay. I would just like to add one thing. Lyndon LaRouche, one of his most excellent, scientifically profound forecasts was his description of what happens in a breakdown crisis. He says, it's like a car that's heading towards a cliff, and when you put on the brakes, it turns to the right. And if you turn the steering wheel, the car stops. None of the previous laws work under conditions of a breakdown crisis. And I think this is something that President Trump, among others, is going to learn very quickly. Because the result of the efforts to impose massive, bone-crushing sanctions on Russia and China has phenomenally backfired. They jammed on the brakes and the car turned to the right. This has actually contributed, as people understand now, to the very de-dollarization which President Trump says he is opposed to. The news for him, which he'll find out, is that the policy of imposing sanctions on countries in terms of tariffs and trade, not just the financial sanctions, is going to force countries to trade with each other and exclude the insane policies emanating from Washington, D.C. Brazil gets hit with sanctions because the government of Brazil refuses to listen to the dictates coming from Washington about how to run their political situation, and people, they're being told they have to choose Bolsonaro as the next president, or else. What's going to happen with Brazil, as will happen with every country around the world, is they're simply going to learn that they have to trade with somebody else. So the end result of this thing is going to be the exact opposite of what they intend. The problem that they have is that they are operating in a real universe. They are not operating in the universe of computer forecasts and linear extrapolations based on an AI model. The real universe does not function according to those laws. And what this is already creating, and will create even more so, are tremendous openings and opportunities for organizing. The optimism and enthusiasm you heard in that last video is extraordinarily important, and this is what you're getting from the BRICS. Difficulties, ups and downs, the last meeting in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro, of the BRICS meeting had high points and low points. But just to give you one final example of how this works, the big news in the Western media, the big point they were celebrating, is that Putin and Xi Jinping didn't go to the summit. And therefore, it's all over for the BRICS. Well, the fact of the matter is that the single most significant proposal and discussion that was had at that BRICS meeting was the proposal by President Putin to establish new investment platforms to channel credit into development on a massive scale, not into the speculative bubble that I was showing you earlier, not for the cancer, but for actual production. And that proposal came from Putin, backed by Xi Jinping, the two presidents who weren't there, supposedly. So I think that the laws of the physical universe are going to, and therefore the economic universe, which runs in the exact same way as the physical universe, by creativity, is going to provide a shocking result for the people who think that they can simply command the way Ozymandias commanded. That doesn't solve our problem. That sets the basis in which we can organize, and organize, because we will have an opening for the kind of optimism we saw in that last video to infect the entire Western world as well, both your continent and mine as well, which desperately need that kind of optimism and can-do sense that we can change the world around us.
Danke, Dennis. Haben wir Fragen im Publikum?
Thank you, Dennis. Are there questions from the audience? What?
Haben wir ein Mikrofon? Ja, kommt. Mikrofon kommt.
Hört man mich. Bettina Wawitz aus Berlin.
I'm Bettina Wawitz from Berlin. I'm talking German, and I hope it will be translated. I'm thinking what has been said about nuclear energy, and as option is proposed that there is no dangers are connected to that. Both at the nuclear reaction itself and the nuclear power plants themselves, and the possibility to produce nuclear weapons, and also the dumping problem, but that for thousands of years later the problems will appear. This is not being discussed at all, and also the cost question is being ignored, especially concerning nuclear, solar and wind power. It cannot be seen what kind of trash is already produced, what kind of effort is that, and if it's actually possible at all to get rid of this trash, that there's no danger for the posterity. I'm a doctor, medical doctor. I'm interested very much in these questions, and I would actually propose that people comment on that question.
Das ist eine sehr wichtige Frage.
That is a very important question. And this is, if you have a fusion PowerPoint, power work, this is the radioactive waste is comparable to X-ray machine. So there is actually not a big problem for containing that. In the Lennard reactions, what is the problem there is a very strong magnetic field. So there is no gamma ray can escape from that. Nobody would do that. Of course, if you build a variant where a certain radiation comes out, that must be taken care of. It's gamma rays which emanate from certain things, but this is constructive thing that it must be done in the correct way. But so if there's tritium coming out and must be stored, this can be controlled locally, and the rest is emanating into the air, like helium. But this is a half time of 12 years, and that is so little that you cannot measure it anymore. The risk is not to be overestimated, but after Chernobyl, there was a sharpening of the values, and if you opened meat from former times, there was more radiation than later. So in this kind of subject, you must know where are the limits, what is dangerous, and of course, too much is not allowed. But you must have the right measurement, and nobody has an interest to destroy the environment.
Ja, bitte. Es ist an. Es ist an. Sie brauchen nur zu sprechen.
Okay, seems to work. I have a somewhat futuristic answer to that. I come from, well, let's say single atom spectroscopy. So we take one atom and excite it with a laser to one particular energy state. And so we can exactly control which energy state is excited. Whereas if you take today's nuclear reactors, you have basically an uncontrolled excitation of a number of different states, which are finally difficult to control. And so my suggestion would be, before going to use this, clean up the field. get to a state where you can excite and control exactly the state which you want to excite and which decays into a well-defined state, which you can then use by, well, what is called nowadays transmutation. And actually that was an idea I had in 75 already, and the people from Siemens told me it's too expensive. Anyway, that's sort of pursued nowadays, but it's of course difficult if you deal with a whole bunch of excited states which decay more or less quickly. And so I would say before going full scale into this field, start cleanup work, start devising processes in which you can controlled way excite states so that you know exactly what's going to come out and that you can control what comes out, and even use the decay for energy generation. Okay, that would be my suggestion. Yeah, I mean, if you can compare it to the development of burning fuel. I mean, fire has been used also in a very uncontrolled way. And that's why we have firefighters in every city, because it's difficult to control. And so I think we should learn from that and say, well, before we go into full-scale things, let's be sure we can control everything we want to use. Okay, so that's my large-scale project, but it comes out from some experience I had over the years in spectroscopy, basically, and nuclear spectroscopy also. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Professor Weiss. I would like to question, I speak now in English to make it short, question to Professor Battaglia. Professor Battaglia, I have in former times I heard you talk about the rising use of CO2. The mankind produces CO2 more and more and more because the developing countries want to develop and so on. And at the same time, there are limits, for example, in Europe, EU, for the total stop of CO2. On the one hand, it goes up and goes up further and further. And on the other hand, in a few years, there should be no CO2 production at all. What is the state of the art of this this fight? Yeah.
Please unmute.
Okay. Thank you. I think there is no net zero is going to occur because you know the Kyoto Protocol wanted to reduce the CO2 emissions by about globally by 3% with respect to the emission of 1990. And then there was the 2020 package for climate of the European Union. They wanted to reduce by 20% by 2020 the CO2 emissions by 20%. The truth is that the CO2 emissions has not been reduced by 3%, not by 20%, but with respect to the 1990 emissions, the CO2 emissions have increased by 60%. India and China increased their CO2 emissions by 350%. So this net zero is not going to occur at all, and there is no reason it should occur at all, because CO2 has nothing to do with climate. CO2 has nothing to do with global warming. I mean, anthropogenic CO2 has nothing to do with global warming. Actually, if we introduce CO2 in the atmosphere, this is good because CO2 is food for the plants, and there is going to be a better and vegetation, increasing food, increasing production in agriculture because of CO2. So this policy, this European policy, is simply not going to occur, and it's also foolish because European contribution to the CO2 emission is less than 10%, it's about 9%. So even if European would get net zero by tomorrow, this is not going to affect the climate, given if CO2 was had anything to do with climate.
Jason?
I just want to, while I have the chance, reflect on a connection between science and culture. What we've heard today about the attack on fossil fuels as a major effort that holds humanity back, I think about the way that this issue has been used culturally on people. if we think back to the Fridays for the Future and Greta Thunberg, you know, scowling at everybody and scolding everybody and how dare you-ing and all of this, the mantra at the time was, we have to be scientific. I think that this has done grave damage to the practice of science in taking up this phrase or this mantle in pushing a policy of anti-development. I think we see the effects of that negative impact on science and other fields today. But just as the alternative to insane culture, I don't need to give examples, we can think of plenty. The alternative to that is not purely a return to traditional values. Sure, some are good, some aren't. Some traditions are good, some aren't. The alternative is classical culture, not traditional per se. At having been scolded and told to do things on a basis that isn't always accurate, the alternative to that is to not say, I'm going to trust my gut, or Joe Rogan, or something like this. The alternative is to adopt a classical approach to science, namely, how did people figure things out in the past? That's something that it's a shared patrimony of our human species to look back at these great discoveries and benefit from reliving them to sharpen our ability to think in the present.
Thank you, Jason. And thank you for a good Sunday morning. We finish now actually. Wir beenden jetzt tatsächlich unser Panel Nummer 3. Vielen Dank und einen guten Appetit.